All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon. This is I think, first edition of this webinar series for the year. And with that, I think it's really suiting that we're going to have Dr. Gail Hansen. She's going to give us literally perspective, like on trees and like the big picture of where they fit in urban landscapes. Um, she was with the Environmental Horticulture Department. It's been shifted a little bit. I think they're in Horticultural Sciences now is the name.
Mhm.
But yeah, still with UF, IFAS, and all of that. And so we're really thankful for her being here today. So thank you very much, Dr. Hansen.
Okay, well, thanks, John, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm looking across, I don't see any problems.
Sounds good.
Okay, sounds good. All right, great. So I'm going to talk about urban trees today from a designer's perspective. I have my degrees in landscape architecture, and I worked for a landscape architecture firm before I came to UF for about 10 years, so have dealt a lot with these issues that designers have to work with. But I think that it's also important for example, for contractors, maintenance people who work with trees. That's what I'm going to focus mostly on is urban trees today and talk about working with the challenges of working with codes in the urban form and utilities when you are working with urban trees. So I have this diagram here, and it shows the connection between the three things I listed, the codes, urban form, and utilities. So in the top circle there, Um, codes, I'm talking mostly about development codes and planning codes, but also codes for buildings. And then in many cities and municipalities, they'll also have tree codes, especially for street trees. So those are kind of the code area. And the reason why, let me see if I can. The reason why I wanted to talk about codes first is because urban development codes are what dictate the urban form. So when I'm talking about urban form, I'm talking about the built spaces, like you can see in that model there, and also the green spaces. And I inserted trees in there. It's kind of squished between built spaces and green spaces because trees kind of serve both. They're technically a built element in the city, but they can also be a green space if you use your street trees and other plantings in streets. So the urban form then dictates the location of utilities. And utilities are underground or above ground, but today, mostly in most cities, everything is underground. And in fact, it's really interesting to look or know what is beneath our feet. It's really a whole mishmash of pipes and conduits and cables and all sorts of stuff. And literally, if you were to take that model that you see there and flip it over, you would just see this whole mess of everything underneath, underground. And that's important with street trees or other trees in green spaces because you always have to be careful, of course, about what is underground. So the utilities basically dictate the location and type of trees that you can use. And then, of course, the last one would be if the city has urban forest codes or regulations to regulate like street tree tree types or spacing and stuff like that. So this model here is a model of Portland, Oregon that was built in the 70s, and I really like it because it's built literally from a redwood tree, and it shows the typical form of cities all over the world, around the globe. We just have a lot of buildings, and in high buildings in dense areas, and then lower buildings in the outskirts of the city, and they're all knitted together and intersected by streets. And so when we talk about street trees and cities, we're pretty much talking about every city in the world. So I wanted to talk a little bit about um, future urban streets and street trees. I've been reading some articles about where green spaces can be, or where futurists are predicting green spaces will be in cities. And I came across this one. I believe it's AI generated the image on the left, um, of what somebody's um, thinks a street tree or thinks a street in a city should look like. And of course, it's very beautiful. It's very green, and there's a lot of trees there. And that's the idea, is that we can kind of have these green threads that stitch together the urban fabric. Um, the picture on the right is more of the reality of what most urban streets look like. I took that picture in Paris, and obviously it's not nearly as many trees, but it's more typical of the types of street trees and the green urban threads that we have right now in most urban areas. Um, and I also, in that same website that I found these pictures, they were looking at pedestrian malls and pedestrian areas. So you have your vehicular circulation and your pedestrian circulation. And this was their vision of what a pedestrian mall could look like, which actually looks more like a park. And so it's very interesting. I mean, I'd love to walk through this particular pedestrian area. That's a vision for the future. But I also put in a picture of a street that many of you might recognize. It's the Champs-Élysées in Paris, and it's probably the most walked pedestrian corridor in a city in the world, the most famous. And that's just because Paris is the most visited city in the world. But it was, a very pleasant, very nice promenade to walk on with 3 rows of street trees. And I thought that that was kind of the perfect example for other cities to what they might kind of aim toward. But I was also very interested in looking at where else people are putting trees. And these buildings are called treescapers rather than skyscrapers. And you might be familiar with these. The one on the left is Bosco Verticale in Milan, Italy. It's been around for a while, so it's not a new building, but it's really fantastic with all the balconies that it has. And they have more than 900 trees and shrubs on this building in these balconies that support about 20 different species of birds. And a newer version is the Arcos Green Roof Pyramid in Fukuoka, Japan. And this building is amazing. They have over 50,000 trees and shrubs on this building. It's much bigger than the Bosco Verticale. But it's just amazing the number of trees that they've been able to pack into that space. And a lot of city futurists believe that the buildings are going to be the place where trees are going to be put, and not so much the street trees, probably in addition to more street trees, but the buildings seem to be the area where future designers and architects and so forth, working with horticulturists and everything, that this is the way to go in the future. So that gives us a glimpse into the future, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing right now. In my classes, I teach 2 landscape design courses. One is a beginning course, and the other advanced, where we focus on sustainability. And this is a document that I wrote that it's posted on the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program website, and it's standards for high performing landscapes. And I wrote this with my class as a blueprint for community landscape standards. And it has information in there on street trees and trees in parks and green spaces also. But the reason I'm pointing this one out is because it we included in it some new types of codes, and some ways that when you have a high performing landscape that you can uh, measure the performance of the landscape, which means you can then evaluate it and you can enforce the codes because of the way that they're written. So these high-performing landscapes, this idea is not new. The Landscape Architecture Foundation has an entire website dedicated to this, and you can find all sorts of resources there. And the idea is that you want to know if a landscape is performing in the way that you intended it to. Like, what were your goals and your objectives for this landscape? And you lay those out, and then you figure out how to measure, evaluate, and enforce your goals. Um, so that's a document that you might be interested in looking at. Um, this semester in my class, we are doing what we're calling the Good Neighborhood Project. And we are putting together kind of a sister document for this first one. And a lot of it is based on opportunities for trees and green spaces. And this is a page out of the new document. And I'm going to show you a little bit in a little bit more detail the graphics that we had on that one page. So this is an example of what we're looking for. This is actually not a super new design. I think it was first done in 2022. Um, and it's the Seattle C Street. Some of you may be familiar with this if you are keeping up with trends with street trees and other urban design. The C stands for Street Edge Alternatives. And the idea behind this is several goals for it. And this one was built. And so they actually, like I said, in 2022. So it's been around for a while and they've done metrics on it and measuring, and it has been actually very successful. You can see it's very different from your typical straight street in a neighborhood. It's got the wiggles in it. And those wiggles were on purpose for a couple of reasons. One of them was to kind of mimic natural drainage and force water flow going different directions. Another one was because it's a traffic calming street. People slow down on wiggly streets. Um, so this street is actually only 14 feet wide, but it has curbs that are low curves, and that actually helps to make it a little bit wider for emergency vehicles to go through. And what's different about it too is that the parking is, in the diagram they showed it as head-in diagonal parking, but you can see they actually end up just building 90-degree parking. And the way it's designed is the water flows is channeled kind of into these parking areas and then flows on either side into these bioretention cells. And you can see a picture of that down in the right corner. And so they've been able to reduce their stormwater runoff there by 90%. And the way they built the road, it kind of mimics that natural drainage. But the other really important thing was that on this kind of typical street that they redesigned, they were able to add 110 evergreen trees and a little over 1,000 shrubs in this space. And that's the space that you see between the new sidewalk there and the bio retention cells. And they were able to do that without encroaching onto private property by just narrowing the street and dedicating more of it to stormwater. So that's just an example of some of the ideas that we're putting in the Good Neighborhood Project book. Um, but I also wanted to show you real quick this table that we created on high performing landscapes. So you see we have landscape standards, community influences, and the developer goals. And I circled a couple of them, one of them under landscape standards. These are all the things that we came up with that you need to think about when you are trying to develop a high performing landscape. And there's a lot. There's over 100, I think there's like 117 different ideas in here. But we ranked them on priority. And when we did that, you can see in the light green color that when we, in our column with codes and policy, we actually rank those as having the most high priority items for a high performing landscape. So, you look down that column and you see enforceable codes. They have to be measurable. They should be future oriented, environmental protection oriented, environmental enhancement oriented, and, have these specifically for landscapes. Um, and so the reason why we thought they were so important and so high priority is because this idea that codes and policy is what you have to have in place first because it drives everything else in that urban area. And then, of course, community influences, social norms are hugely important. And you can see in the light orange that we ranked a lot of those as high priority because aside from the written codes and what the government dictates and so forth, you have that community where people live and they have a huge influence on what happens in their community. And this table is in the high performing landscapes document that I was telling you is that you can access on the Florida Friendly website. But talking about development codes, I want to talk specifically about streets and green spaces. So when we are talking about streets, in this case, we are talking about that space that goes from building to building front. So it's not just the street, it's not just the verge or the sidewalk. It actually includes the front yards of people because that is in the street envelope or that area that you see when you're in that street. So I just put two examples here of some different types of front yards that from the front of that building to the other building on the opposite side of the street, that is what I'm referring to when I talk about streets. So this is a new type of, well, I wouldn't say it's really new type of codes, form-based codes for walkable urban streets. If you're a designer, you may have heard of these. I actually did a study on these for my dissertation uh, a long time ago. And my question on my dissertation was, do form-based codes actually create walkable urban streets? And the answer was yes, absolutely. And they're a very good type of coding to use if you want to create more walkable urban streets. And I studied 12 communities in the San Francisco Bay Area, small communities that had used form-based codes, and compared those to communities with walkable streets that had been certified as walkable. Um, and these are a couple of the communities that I visited, and I will talk a little bit more about them here. So a form-based code is a code that does exactly what it says. It regulates the form of an urban area, and it's used mostly in like main streets or neighborhood streets, and typically smaller towns use it, not very large cities, but smaller towns. And what i- in looking at these form-based codes, you look at the design qualities that are important to walkability. And there's several of them. And you want to make sure they can be defined, that they can be measured, and they can be quantified. And so form-based codes will regulate those features that we know are important to walkability. And the great thing is with form-based codes is you can show it graphically. So you can kind of project what you want those codes to achieve. So here is a page out of one and it shows, well, we want street trees. We want, the parallel parking. We want the buildings to have a certain aesthetic qualities architecturally, and we want landscapes and so forth. And you can show those in these form-based codes and kind of predict what you want the area to look like, and you'll have more success that way. So There's certain graphics that you'll see embedded in these codes. Almost all of them are, they're written very, there's a formula for them. This diagram on the right shows typically how they'll show a cross section of a street that they might want to, that they're working on for that particular town. And the cross section would show the height of the buildings. It would also show a wide 10-foot walkway here with overhangs, with awnings over them or balconies over them or so forth. And then you can just literally go across and see 6-foot sidewalk, a 6-foot wide green strip where a street tree might be planted, parking and bike lanes and the medians, and then the same on the other side, where they're showing like an awning. Oops, let me go back here. All right, jumping around here. And so you can see how these are easily measured, they're laid out, easy to follow. And so the picture on the left is another town that I visited with and studied their streets. I used an audit instrument that had been developed by somebody else. And you can see that this is obviously a very walkable street and it follows a lot of the kind of layout of the diagram, a wide walkway, parallel parking, and tree canopy. And here's a couple more examples. So the urban design quality here that they were trying to achieve is called enclosure. And enclosure means that you are trying to create this literally like an outdoor room, a space that feels like it's enclosed and feels very comfortable, scale-wise and physically comfortable because there's shade to walk in. And you can create shade a couple of different ways, like these awnings or overheads. And you can see in this particular picture is a very wide sidewalk, the 10-foot wide sidewalk. And so a lot of these form-based codes are actually overlaid in the historic district of these towns. And so it's a way for them to go back and improve that district. Um, this picture with the planters here that are kind of egg-shaped, that's in Petaluma, California, north of San Francisco. And they're using egg-shaped planters because they bill themselves as the egg capital of the world. So that's their theme there. The other things that are important is having a long sight line going down the walk way, sidewalk that you're walking on and being able to look forward. Creation of these street walls by having buildings, it could be houses or commercial buildings up close. And an implied street wall with the trees, the street trees going down through the verge and planters. And then also really paying attention to that sidewalk and street width so you can put seating areas and more plants um, along the street there. So the other thing in your urban form and your form-based codes are best practices with street trees. And here's a couple of photos that show not very good practice on the right-hand side and a much better practice on the left-hand side, much better on the right. So this was a code for a town, Gilroy, which is the garlic capital of the world. So all these towns that ring around San Francisco are agriculture-based towns that were having economic downturns because of their agricultural base was not as strong. And so they were revitalizing their downtown areas. And every one of these cities that I went to, when I talked to the city council people and so forth, said that it was amazing the turnaround in their economic development of the city when they use these form-based codes. It would draw a lot more visitors in from, the city to come out and visit their towns. And so uh, that's the other thing about form-based codes is the whole idea is that you are improving the community area where you want people to come and spend money. And so this one shows the good one shows much wider planter areas than we normally see on streets. So you give the tree a lot more room to grow, and the tree is spaced farther away from the overhead awning you can see there, so it has room to spread. And this was a newly installed form-based code street, so the trees were still small and will eventually be bigger. The other picture here was in another town using form-based codes, but they weren't using it on this particular street. And so it's pretty obvious what the problem is here. Um, Kind of have to wonder which came first, the tree or the awning, but obviously it was the awning because it's attached to the building. And then I'm not sure whose idea it was to plant this tree literally almost right under this awning. Obviously, it's going to present some problems in the future. And that's hopefully what form-based codes can kind of prevent things like that from happening by having their best practices in those codes. So another thing that is really interesting is the idea that shade is a human right. And these codes are looking for ways, different options to create shade, because if you can't put a lot of street trees in, then what are other ways that you can create shade? And this idea of shade being a human right uh, was kind of codified in the Excess Urban Heat Mitigation Act, which was written in 2022. And the idea here was that they had a grant pool, a grant funding pool, and in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, so $30 million available in this grant program that these communities could apply for. And the idea was that in their application process, they would have proposals for creating small-scale heat mitigation projects. And actually, a lot of them are involved with streets because that's kind of where people hang out and where mitigating heat is really important. And so these show a couple of projects. One of these is in Livermore, California, and um, were places where they couldn't put street trees. They built these arbor type structures, and these were fairly new, so you can see the vines were still, growing over it to fill it out. And then also other structures for vines over like seating areas for dining and so forth. But it was all kind of tied in with this idea that shade is a human right and to create more shade in communities. The codes also have landscape metrics or what they call streetscape, a lot of times metrics in there. And again, the idea here is that you make your planting areas for your street trees bigger. So you can put a couple trees in each planting area and or you can add benches or other amenities in those areas and give these street trees a better start to life and a better place to grow. And also ideas about like adding more aesthetic appeal with plant material that's colorful. This one with all the crepe myrtle and the colorful flowers, it was designating an entryway into, I think, a parking lot. So they used their plantings as kind of identity spots along the street and made sure that there was going to be seasonal color and so forth. And this picture on the left is in Livermore, and it is actually an astounding project. I grew up in California, near this area, and we used to drive through Livermore all the time when I was a kid, when we were driving over to the coast. And it was just really strip malls all along their main street, a, a nothing place. Like you would just drive through it and, you know, you wouldn't miss anything because all strip malls. Then they decided they are the rodeo capital of the world, and I don't know, their agricultural base was kind of dying out, and they decided to have some form-based codes written, and they implemented them. It was a several years long project, but the change was astounding. When I first arrived there and drove through, I didn't even recognize it as being Livermore or the one that we used to drive through when I was a kid. And so it's just this. It's been a game changer for them economically. People come here from the big city to visit and take a break and visit a small town, and it's just amazing the transformation that they were able to do with these form-based codes. So I wanted to show you another idea that my students and I came up with, and this is also in the High Performing Landscapes document. We came up with this idea of in this street corridor, since all these developments have these like tiny little front streets and or front yards, and when you drive down the street, you see these mishmash of all these different landscapes, and in a lot of cases, literally hardly any landscape or just turf, that we would think about this street all the way down the block as kind of a potential for a long linear park. And that would be everybody's front yards would be connected together. So one yard would flow onto the other yard, and the only breaks where the sidewalk's coming into the front door. But there was no break between property lines or anything. You would just do this one continuous landscape all the way down. And we called that the front line. And that was kind of a play on the High Line in New York, which I'm sure that many of you are familiar with, an elevated old rail line that is now a hugely popular linear urban park that's elevated, which has generated billions of dollars for the businesses around it. And so it's been highly successful. So there's also the Underline in Miami, which is another long linear park under a freeway, elevated freeway section. And also there's one more. It's called the Below Line, and that one is in Helsinki in Finland, and it's actually a shopping mall, pedestrian mall underground. But it's actually a very well lit, very popular one because they have tubes that let light in from above, and they grow trees and everything down there. So we decided to call ours the front line because it's the front yard. And this idea is that all these boxes here are the metrics that we thought, for a high performing landscape. It has the tree canopy coverage, for example, like it has to cover 40% more of the site. It also has a minimum number of trees, street trees every 30 feet. The fence has to be set back so that there's room for the plant material to go across all the property lines. 75% native plants, 90% drought tolerant plants. So there's a whole bunch of metrics in here that if they are followed when the plants are selected, when they're installed and so forth, should actually create a very high performing landscape. So I presented this at a conference where there was a lot of developers and builders there. And I think there currently are two developers who are testing this concept in their new development. But the important thing too is that this long strip, is being maintained by one company, not by the individual homeowners. And the idea is that the team that goes out to maintain this, they're very familiar with all the plants and they know how to maintain those plants, and that these yards should look better with better and easier maintenance. So that was one of our ideas about this street corridor and how we could improve it thinking that this corridor is actually from the front door of one house to another one across the street and to the houses next door to it. So, just a couple more slides. Urban street tree ordinance and utilities. So this is an issue when I was working as a landscape architect that I came across all the time. The picture on the right is actually a development that I helped to lay out the lots and the streets. Um, but on the codes that we had to follow, made things very difficult. So each of those colored lines represent a utility line. So out in the street, the purple line is the sewer line, and then in the verge there was I think a cable, and the light blue was the irrigation line that was required. These street trees had to have automatic irrigation on them. The water line was under the sidewalk, and the electrical was in the yards. So all the utilities were put in based on those codes. So when it came my turn to put the street trees in, I was like, seriously, where am I going to put these street trees? Because the trees had to be planted at least 3 feet back from the curb. And this green space was, I think, only about 6 feet, maybe 8 feet wide. But where they had put the irrigation line left me just a few feet to, locate the street trees. So obviously, when you look at it and you don't know all these utilities are under here, you're like, why in the world did they put those trees so close to that sidewalk? Why not right down the middle of that verge? And so it was codes that kind of forced that. So now this neighborhood is fairly close to where I live, and so I walk through it occasionally, and this is what I see. Um, this was the inevitable. This was going to happen. I warned them about it. I said, when we put the trees here, we're going to have problems. We're going to be tearing up this sidewalk. It's going to buckle, all these problems. And sure enough, I see this quite often there in that community. They dug up the sidewalk, and you see the roots, of the trees and getting into the water line under the sidewalk. And so that shows poor coordination between the codes and what you are end up being forced to do. I was walking once with a colleague of mine from the forestry department by a UF building. It's off campus, but it's one that I did the landscape for. And the trees, we had to put the trees super close to the building, basically for the same reason. There were too many utility lines. And we were walking by and he goes, look at that. He goes, that's so ridiculous. And that was really stupid. Who put those trees so close to the building? And I was like, I did. And he would, you know, felt kind of bad about what he had said. But I said, look down this street. Do you see that transformer at one end of the street? And look the other way, you see the other transformer. There's a utility line running right through here. And, I had met with the city arborist and we couldn't figure out any other solution to it. And the codes required 3 canopy trees and, per 100 linear feet. And it was even actually by the campus even more. So we just put the trees really close to the buildings and said, okay, you'll have to deal with it later. So one last thing, I think there's only a couple more slides here. One last thing is thinking about street trees as infrastructure. And I read this article that a landscape architect had written in an LA magazine, and he said his op-ed was that urban trees should be classified as infrastructure and maintained as a public utility. And his argument was that if you can find room in a public right-of-way for utilities that service people, why can't we find room for trees that also service people? Ecosystem services, of course, the ones that they provide. And the argument was that an urban forest should be managed like a public utility and that we have GRU is our public utility, that those utility companies would hire the arborists and the other people who would be in charge of maintenance and other things with the trees. So it's something to think about that could a city actually say trees are infrastructure and should be maintained as such. And I put these two pictures in. These are in Portland, Oregon, and if you want to learn a lot about the best way to do stormwater management, go to Portland and take their city tours that they have, and they'll show you all sorts of stormwater management facilities. But the one on the left was really interesting because it was newly built when we went there, and the buildings in the background there are low-income housing and or affordable housing, and um, it used to be just a ditch, a dirt ditch that went along this road, and the stormwater would just flow down the ditch, and it was flooding the um, units on the bottom of this building and creating all sorts of problems. So they had to do something to fix it, and they came in with this idea, which I think was pretty clever, where they created this artificial, man-made, called a novel wetland. It's a structure that doesn't look anything like a natural wetland, but it functions like one. And the stormwater would flow into this terraced um, structure that goes down the hill, and it would slow down the velocity of the water and it would actually absorb a lot of the water. But they also built into it a sidewalk. So now these people have a safe place to walk. When we saw it, it was newly built, so the trees in it were just little sticks, but I would like to go back and see now. I'm guessing that the trees have pretty wide canopies and it's a very nice amenity and it solves many different problems. Um, so looking at this as infrastructure and then incorporating trees into it as part of that infrastructure really made a lot of sense here. And then the other picture is also there in Portland. This was an award-winning design. It's a parking lot, and it shows a bioretention area with a little mini forest in it, and using trees to help absorb a lot of the water that goes into this um, retention area. So I think these are a couple of pretty good arguments for saying that, incorporating trees into these infrastructure utilities could be a good idea. And the last slide here is something kind of funny I just put in here. This is in the John Muir Woods north of San Francisco. And when they carved out a pathway, a hiking trail for people to walk on, um, what you don't see in this picture is up the hill, above these tree roots, is a very large tree. I think it probably was a redwood, because there's tons of them there in the John Muir Woods. And these are the roots that they exposed when they carved out this hiking path. And it was really funny to look at these roots and stand there and hear all the comments that people made about them, the hikers that went by. And I think they're kind of black because people kept touching them. They would reach out and just run their hands all over these roots. And there was a little sign explaining what they were. And people were just amazed by them. They were like, I never knew roots look like this. I thought they were kind of straight and like, or they went straight down or, straight out. And because you see actually a lot of diagrams or pictures that kind of make it look that way. And they were fascinated by it. And so I thought it was great. Kind of, it was not great that they had to expose them to make this trail, but it was good that people were fascinated by this. And it was kind of funny when I took the picture with my phone. You know how the phone will sometimes caption your pictures, and this on my phone it said a group of snakes in the dirt. So obviously they didn't recognize it as roots. They thought it was just a bunch of snakes. And last slide is thank you. I took this picture of these two squirrels hanging out on a branch in a tree in my yard. And I think the squirrels would also like to thank you for planting trees. They look like they're pretty happy hanging out on this branch and just chilling. So thanks. And any questions?
That was wonderful, Dr. Hansen. Thank you so much. I really appreciated the talking about using trees and treating trees as public utilities and how that could really change the mindset of how we manage our urban systems.
Hmm.
That would be very cool.
Yeah, I think it's a system that could work. It's people that work in the utilities department would probably have to maybe change their thinking a little bit, but I think
Add a few arborists.
yes, a few arborists and urban foresters and so forth.
If anyone has any questions, you can type them into the chat.
So
Um,
I don't I don't know if there's a way I can. Oh, here I see my chat button. Oh.
if there are any questions, then I'll go ahead and launch the quiz. Oh gosh, back. We'll do the post quiz. And if everybody wants to take a few minutes to answer these three questions. Um, yeah, I also appreciated how much the all the pictures of practical use of urban street trees and adding plant material to our urban area because it's hard to do. I know here in Palm Beach County we have some difficulty doing it just because if it's attached to somebody's property, if a homeowner is going to be responsible for those trees, they do not want them. So
Mhm.
it adds some complexity with it. But
That's why I thought that the Seattle C Street, I thought that was actually a pretty intriguing and kind of revolutionary idea about a street where just make the street narrower and increase the width of the green space without
mhm,
encroaching into people's yards. And then all the people that live along there, they enjoy those trees as if they were part of their yard, but they're not responsible for
yeah,
maintaining them or anything.
yeah,
And what I read about it is it's been highly successful. Like the people in the neighborhood just love that
yeah.
kind of wiggly street and having those additional, 100 or so trees put in there that they enjoy, um, but
I mean,
not their
because
responsibility.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it makes a huge difference, right? Because then you have the birds and you have
Hmm.
you increase your wildlife and your shade, and it's more enjoyable to actually be outdoors without the responsibility of it.
Right. And also by widening it, you could plant more plants too. So it's not
Hmm.
just the trees, but a lot more landscape, much more green. It's like a little green corridor going down the street. And they
Yeah.
just took a typical neighborhood street. That was the street that the neighborhood already existed there, and they went back in and redid it.
Oh.
And so it wasn't built initially like that. I think you could see from the picture that all the other streets were straight. So that
Hmm.
was kind of like a test. That was their pilot
Yeah.
test study that they did.
Show, to show that it is possible.
Yeah. Hmm.
It looks like we do have a question. As new developments run rampant in Florida, why aren't we seeing more of these implemented in our communities? And then also, the same person said, I'm seeing a lack of biodiversity, or am I seeing a lack of biodiversity, or am I just seeing palms and crepe myrtles?
So the short answer is because the development codes don't require it. And so if we had better written codes, more like the form-based codes, and they were more specific and they required it, and a developer would have to follow those codes, I think that you would start to see much better green infrastructure in these communities. Um, the developers are uh, uh, pretty strong. They have the ear of the city council. The developers do, so they have a lot of influence, and a lot of them are kind of saying, look, we have our return on investment that we have to protect, and we need some more ideas here or more pilot studies like that C Street in Seattle. as proof of concept to show us that this does work and it's worth our effort to put, to design this into our neighborhoods. And I've actually worked with a couple of other faculty here in a couple of neighborhoods south of, uh, well, one up in Yulee, Florida, and another in Lake Nona area. Um, but the, you know, those developers were saying the same thing. We really have our business model that we follow. We know it works. We know we can get our return on investment, and it's really hard for us to break out of that business model. And but I think just try it. Try it on one of your streets and see what happens.
Yeah,
Everybody who
I was to say with the metrics that you're presenting here, I think that that's really important in to be able to make those code changes and kind of change the minds of people making the developments and to show that street trees, the impact isn't from necessarily from the trees, it's from the infrastructure and these
Mhm.
other things that you're having to compete with. But if we add the street trees, that we can have all these XYZ benefits that far outweigh the potential negatives that people see.
Mhm.
But so yeah, having these metrics is really important. And so
Yeah, and that's why this idea of the high performing landscapes is you have metrics you can measure. I see there was a question about the front line. They were asking about restrict or access to the side and rear yards. In this particular development, there it was alley loaded. So the garages were from an alley in the back. And so that's how they got access to their backyard and their side yards from the back side of the house. So it really is one that just works best on alley loaded lots and not on the street loaded lots. Because if it's street loaded, you would also have a driveway going up to a garage. And so, yeah, it depends on the type of uh, the way that the access to the garage is built in that development.
and somebody else has a question about how does one get into writing new codes and standards for your local communities?
Yeah, that's a kind of a tough one. So the planning department of most cities and towns are the ones that write these codes. And sometimes they will have kind of open sessions for people to weigh in on these codes. Codes are not easy to write. They are actually kind of difficult. You have a lot of things you have to consider in the codes. Um, you know, um, the cost, the feasibility, what's to be gained from this code and everything. Um, but you can also lobby with the city council and their planning department and kind of weigh in on these codes. When I was working as a landscape architect, we used to complain so bitterly about the landscape codes that one day we were in a meeting and we were complaining again about them, how difficult they were to work with. And the one of the planners just kind of threw his pencil down on the table and he said, "Well, if you think they're so easy to write, you write them." So he challenged us to write the landscape code. So we took him up on it. I can tell you it wasn't that easy to write, but I think we came out with some pretty good codes, and they took our recommendations and added them into the city code. And so, but we had an in because we were LAs working with those codes, and we would always complain about them.
Yeah. I know that we talked with our some of the folks in our code enforcement and our planning, zoning, and building department, and they said, "Well, vote. It's our folks that are in our commissioners that really end up making the decision." So it's
Right.
sometimes that's also the difficult part, that it's not necessarily the end. The person that makes the decision isn't the person writing it
Right.
as
Yeah.
to whether or not those codes get enacted.
Right. Yeah. A lot of layers to
Yeah.
how that
Yes.
happens. A lot.
Um, let's see. somebody else said it's an uphill battle between the developers, the public works department, and the utility providers. Yet the proposal is not impossible. That is very true.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it's there's a lot of layers of people that are touched by these codes and have to pay attention to them and use them, and their work and what they do is kind of dependent on these codes. So it's just like trying to do a design in like an overlay district. I did one in the Duck Pond area here in Gainesville, and I think there were like 9 different jurisdictional agencies that I had to work with. And I'm like, there was the historic district. I had to work with the historic preservation officer out of Tallahassee with that. And uh, it was a neighborhood district. And then the streets were city streets and county streets. And just like so many people. Yeah.
it's it's
It was
complicated at best.
complicated. It was a wonder. I mean, it's amazing that we actually even accomplished something there.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at 1 o'clock, so
Mhm.
wrap it up. I appreciate your time. I know that John does as well, and thank you all for joining us. And Dr. Hansen, again, this is fabulous and definitely a topic that people really appreciate and love to hear about because everybody always has questions about their street trees and more trees and how do we get this done. And so we'll probably have you on for more talks if you don't mind.
Great. I'd love to. Um, since I teach landscape design, I talk about all sorts of things about design and landscapes in the urban sphere. One thing that people might be interested to know is that in Extension, we now have a new initiative, Initiative 4, and it's going to really concentrate on urban problems and urban design. So I think we'll be producing some good stuff out of that.
Yeah, we're excited about it.
Yes, that'll be
Well,
great.
everyone, I hope you have a great afternoon and we'll talk to you later. Thank
All
you.
right.
All right. Bye.
Thanks.